What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. Sometimes the news cycle hits you with a blast of headlines so absurd, you just shrug and move on. After all, it's not about people being rounded up, killed, or driven to the brink of self-destruction. So what's the point in wasting outrage on it, right? That is what most people think. Well, that's exactly the trap. Because some of these minor, at least seemingly legal tweaks and bureaucratic power plays do not make front-page drama, but they change the whole architecture of the country. They alter who holds power, who gets crushed under it, and what future you'll be living in after the smoke clears. Two events recently flew completely under the radar for most Russians, but together they spell out one thing loud and clear. Putin's government is setting the stage for a full-on property grab like likes of which we have not seen since 1990s Wild East. Except this time, it is the state wearing the bandit mask. Or has the state ever removed the mask? Well, that's a good question actually. But anyways, first the Constitutional Court casually rewrote the rules for privatization disputes, letting the clock on legal challenges start not from when privatization happened, but from whenever some prosecutor decided to inspect it. Translation: that apartment you bought in 2002, your business, your hotel, even your grandmother's shop, can be yanked away decades later, because someone in power says the state did not get its fair cut back in the day. Second thing is that prosecutors just hit 5 enterprises at once in coordinated visits. And that's not random, that's not routine inspection, that is the signal flare for a new wave of systemic expropriations. What's been happening behind the scenes over the last 3 years is about to go full industrial scale. And like everything else in Putin's Russia, it is being sold to the public as justice. Fixing the wrongs of the 90s, when in reality it's just clearing the shelves for cronies and state-controlled monopolies. The regime is ready to literally steal people's assets in order to fund their failing war effort. Everything is in place for this to happen any day now. The last remaining thing is the green light from Putin. And you know what's the scariest part? The Central Bank of Russia, specifically its head Elvira Nabiulina, gave very unambiguous hints in the past that if military spending is left unchecked, something like this is destined to happen. Simply because there won't be money left, and Putin is ready to ruin the country first, rather than admitting that he was wrong and accepting the defeat. The signs were there, and the messages were encrypted, but any watchful eye was able to spot that something is really wrong. And now, looking back, it all unfortunately makes sense. So today, let's talk about how Russia went from chaotic privatization to mafia-style nationalization, why the state is so obsessed with owning everything, why it will destroy what's left of the economy, and why Putin gets to do it without even breaking a sweat. Let's rewind to the year 2000. Putin has barely moved into the Kremlin, Victory Day hangover still fresh, and the first thing he does after the inaugural parade, sends an FSB special forces to raid Media Most, the parent company of NTV and Echo of Moscow. That was the very first big trophy in his career of asset seizures. A federal-level media holding stripped from its owner and folded into the state's control. And that sent the message loud and clear. There will be no truly independent, privately owned national media in the new Russia. From there, the news tightened year by year. First it was media, then it was energy. Rosneft, for example, went from a minor oil player with a couple of shabby fields to the monster swallowing Yukos and other giants whole, turning itself into the Kremlin's personal gas station. Back in the early 2000s, the theft was polite, kinda. Owners got a payout, maybe on an exit visa. Putin could not spook foreign investors too much. He still needed Western capital, technology, and the illusion of some kind of existing legal system. Every daylight robbery came wrapped in paperwork and some made-up accusations. Tax evasion, political extremism, or some vague economic harm to the state. Whatever it means, people don't know it even today. But the idea was same. Concentrate the crown jewels of Russian industry in the hands of the state, or at least state-approved oligarchs. And propaganda made sure that people swallowed it, feeding them the fairy tale that Putin was correcting the wrongs of the 1990s, when shady businessmen scooped up Soviet factories for nothing but just a few rubles and just maybe a thank you note. For years, this story worked because yes, the 90s were chaotic, corrupt and bloody, and Putin did seem like this some kind of an anti-mafia FSB officer purging everyone. People wanted stability and Putin said that he will give them that. But here's the thing, privatization, even the dirty kind, still created competition, and competition is the one thing an autocracy cannot survive. That's why Gazprom, somewhere in parallel universe, privately owned, independently managed, would have strangled the idea of invading Ukraine in its early stages. Yeah, I can imagine this, right? Why? Because it would have destroyed its own pipelines, profits and European contracts. Private industry does not start wars that ruin its own business model, just does not make sense. State industry, on the other hand, it is just a political toy. And in Putin's Russia, toys are meant to be broken. So, why does Putin want to have all the huge corporations, oligarchs and media under his umbrella? Surely it's not just because of money, right? That's hundreds of billions of dollars we're talking about. No man on earth can spend that much within his lifetime. It must be more than just about the money, right? Let's try to answer this question in our next chapter. When all the major assets belong to the same guy, call him the state or just Putin, you kill not just competition in business, but competition in politics. Back in the 1990s, as rotten as it was, Boris Yeltsin still had to negotiate. He needed oligarchs with money and media to win elections, and those oligarchs, they had different demands and interests. That messy backroom bargaining acted as a crude system of checks and balances. You give me the votes, I give you the competitors' contracts. That was the deal in its very basic understanding. Putin, though, hates negotiation. In his ideal world, everyone who matters works for him, owes him, or fears him. That's exactly what state monopolies deliver. You get giant entities like Gazprom Media, yes, and oil and gas behemoth running TV channels and news sites, because their commercial role does not matter, at least not anymore. What matters is that they're tools of control. Efficiency, profitability, not even in their top 10 priorities anymore. Which kind of business cares about making money, right? The Nord Stream pipelines are another masterpiece of this logic. Any serious analyst could see that they would never return a profit, even before sanctions hit. But they got built anyway, because the goal was not profit, it was politics. It was contracts for Putin's friends, prestige projects for propaganda reels, and another national treasure to wave around. The problem? In a real economy, losses matter. In a state-owned crony economy, losses are just numbers on paper, covered by taxpayer money. Profits, when they do exist, they just magically end up in private pockets. And losses, they're obviously distributed among everyone to pay. Or I better say not exactly everyone, excluding the ones responsible for these losses, of course. That's not capitalism, that's feudalism with spreadsheets. So no wonder sooner or later the economic collapse was bound to happen. The signs were there. Smart financial people predicted the worst-case scenarios, and contingency plans were written down. Not too many people, however, heard about the financial disaster brewing within, courtesy of Russian propaganda. But you can hide things from plain sight, while you cannot erase them like they never happened. And just like that, the problems were brewing within, until it was too much to hide. And one of such contingency plans was to simply rob people from their properties, assets, and money to plug in the holes in this economic bucket. The legal base has been already set in place behind the scenes, so what was left once again is the Tsar's approval. Let's talk about it in our next chapter. This latest constitutional court ruling is not just a legal tweak, it's a nuclear option against private ownership. By allowing prosecutors to reopen privatization cases decades later, the Kremlin has effectively declared that nothing you own is truly yours. An apartment, a factory, a chain of stores, any of it can be seized if some official discovers a procedural flaw from 25 years ago, quarter of a century. And make no mistake, this is not about justice or cleaning up corruption. This is about clearing out the last pockets of independent wealth and influence. Until now, property seizures were mostly targeted political opponents, disloyal businessmen, industries that Kremlin wanted to control. Now, it's industrial scale. The 5 simultaneous raids on major enterprises were not random. They were the warm-up act for mass appropriation, the final test before nationwide rollout. This surely changes everything for investment in Russia wherever is left. No serious investor will pour millions into a country where the state can seize assets on a whim. Forget long-term projects, high-end industries, or anything that requires stability. What you get instead is a small, low-risk, cash-based business, and a massive exodus of capital to anywhere with an actual legal system, from Dubai to Tbilisi. And here's the long-term poison. Once property rights are dead, you kill innovation. Nobody builds for the future if the future can be confiscated. The IT sector's collapse is already a textbook case. Once globally competitive, now just reduced to bloated state projects like VK, Vkontakte, which is trying and obviously failing to replace half of the internet while racking up billions in debt. And they keep doing it, because these billions are donated by the regular people, quote unquote. Oligarchs' pockets remain untouched. The regime's coffers are unopened, but in the unlikely case scenario, if some delusional idea indeed brings profits, those very same oligarchs will be the first and last in line to distribute these national achievements. If you're old enough to remember Soviet-made cars, refrigerators, or those rubbery state-approved sausages, you already know what happens when the government runs the economy. Substandard products, shortages, and zero accountability, obviously. That is exactly where Putin's model is dragging Russia, except now the inefficiency is turbocharged with corruption and digital age incompetence. Once again, take that VK, for example, once the crown jewel of Russia tech. Under private ownership, it dominated the market, outpacing Facebook in the region, turning profits, innovating. Everyone used it, me including. 95% of my friends were using it. Then, the state stepped in and took it away from Pavel Durov, who is the creator of Telegram now, by the way. Now it's a money pit tasked with replacing Google Play, YouTube, Telegram, basically every foreign platform, under the banner of sovereign internet. Internet, I guess they're gonna call it. The result? Clunky, buggy apps nobody wants, and financial statements drenched in red ink. Personally, I check my VK page for a total of like 10 minutes per month. Out of 200 or so friends I have there, 3 or 4 are randomly online. Videos that I used to watch there, music that I used to listen is now all on separate platforms, and the only content that is added there is heavily censored by the Kremlin. Only Kremlin-approved videos are getting to upload. No wonder people no longer use VK, would you? This is what state ownership does. It turns thriving enterprises into political tools, strips them of their competitive edge, and uses them as piggy banks for the well-connected. It is the same story as Soviet industry, but now, instead of ministry producing subpar TVs, you have billion-dollar tech corporations run by bureaucrats' children, sometimes literal children, and therefore hemorrhaging cash while pretending to innovate. And because everything is centralized, there is no counterweight. In the Soviet Union, this model at least had the excuse of isolation. In 2025, Russia is trying to compete in a globalized economy by resurrecting an economic corpse that has already been buried once. It smells of failure, it has decomposed, but they just slap some band-aids and linen wraps to pretend like it's all going to work just fine. But will it work? That is the question. Well, there you have it, guys. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. If you wish to support my work, there are links down below. Thanks so much for watching. See you tomorrow.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe in ridiculous Russian propaganda.